Ladies and gentlemen, let's play darts!
What a belt.
Welcome! Don't know how long I can do that voice. The Lambert and Butler voice. My name is Jack Rivlin. Zach Sweeney-Lynch is here as ever.
Hello, Jack.
And we are joined for a very special darts episode by Ruth Husko.
Hey, we've got the pictures ready.
Yes, we were going to do walk-ons. We've left out a few good ideas. We were going to come dressed as Smurfs and Minions. And you were going to be a packet of fags.
I was going to be dressed as a packet of fags, yeah. Keep an eye out for that costume. I'll be wearing it in the future.
Yeah, next time. At a live show.
Oh, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it.
So we should... Ruth, you're a proper fan, right?
Absolutely, I am, yeah. When I was growing up, darts was always on the telly of the Circus Tavern days, which we'll talk about. It was always on the telly. My dad played darts. There was always flights, like Union Jack flights. He's not a racist. Union Jack flights.
Just a Union Jack.
It was big at the time. There's always like, yeah, and like growing up, being taken to the pub a lot. You used to play darts in there, and just always, it's always been like a pub game, so I've always known about it. And then when it moved to Sky, I used to just got into it again because it feels very Christmassy because it's always on in December for those like 2 or 3 weeks in December. And yeah, it's just become a tradition now to just watch it all the time. And the few times I've been as well has been amazing.
Do you watch the more minor tournaments? Are you there at like Carlisle Leisure Centre on a Tuesday afternoon?
Well, they do them in Wolverhampton. Like there was one not far from me recently. So there's so many throughout the year, different games. I'm not gonna claim, by the way, to be like a technical darts expert. I'm more into the players and their personalities, the vibe, the pictures.
Yeah.
What
happened at the Circus Tavern?
Yeah, so I went to the Circus Tavern to see like where darts had started, and it was like it's like I can't remember what it's called. It's like the seniors. That's it. So it's all the older players playing. Saw John Lowe like play there before he died, and met Bobby George. Bobby George was doing like a meet and greet and talking to people. And it's like the when you go into the Circus Tavern, you watch on YouTube, you'll see how it used to look if you hadn't seen it. There's like the bottom is all like a bar with like the hockey set up and loads of little tables and stuff. It's like a working men's club, massive, and it also doubled up as a nightclub where there was a sign on the wall. It still is a nightclub, and it was £20 all you can drink. One of those things.
Is this where they hosted the World Championships before Ali Pali?
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Yeah, and that's where like the worlds used to be, and then at the top of where we went to see Bobby George like do his Q&A, at the top of the venue it is a strip club, and it is like tiger print wallpaper, leopard print carpet, a pole in the middle of the room, lots of 80s and 90s glamour sexy women, pictures of sexy women. And Bobby George was just sat on the stage, he's a bit of what they call a raconteur. And just talking about, he's really charming and funny, but the vibe was like just unhinged vibe, like big pole, loads of like pink fur, and it was just crazy. I would recommend, they still do the seniors, I think, every February. So if you want to go to Purfleet in Essex, and I would 100% recommend you go. And I'd say to anyone as well, if you can get tickets to the Worlds, then go to that at the Alexander Palace. Like it's amazing. You'll never look back, because you guys haven't been, have you?
No, never been.
No,
you'll love it.
We were thinking for our Christmas drinks, but
yeah,
they're like gold dust, the tickets, aren't they?
Impossible to get this year because of the Luke Littler effect. But maybe I said this on the last podcast, but on Twitter someone said you can't get tickets because of Luke Littler wokeness. Luke the Nuke woke.
Yeah, that woke teenager.
It's woke to like darts now, guys.
Obviously, we're gonna start quite far back in time, the first golden era of darts. But who are your sort of favourite characters at the moment?
My favourite darts player is Johnny Clayton. I love him. But in terms of characters, I'm having a James Wade moment at the minute, because I didn't like him for ages. And then I watched this documentary with him on where he's talking about some of his behaviours on the hockey have just been a bit strange. And I found out he's got like ADHD and bipolar, which was really interesting to me. Because I was like, oh, okay, because before he'd been a bit like villainised because he did this, like it was in the paper actually, like he over celebrated and like got in.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't remember the guy's name. Shouted in his face when he won. He was like, "Yeah," like this. But then more recently, there's been footage of him farting on the hockey, really loud, to the point where you think it's it's gone too far.
That was the squelcher, wasn't it? Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
This was the one where he then tweeted afterwards saying it was just the Velcro on my shoe.
He's a bit like self-aware with stuff like that. So,
But
yeah.
he did. It was a real fart, wasn't it? He was joking about the
Oh,
Velcro.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you watch it yourself. There's no mistake.
Do you reckon it was involuntary? It's quite a brave. I guess you don't think
it's-
you're
'cause
mic'd up.
If you watch the video, he does sort of slow down and like raise
Some
one
force behind
leg
that one.
a little
He
bit.
puts his hands on the table, I think, to brace himself. Yeah, he steadies
That's a
himself.
tell. Yeah, that's a real tell.
It's honestly worth watching the clip. But yeah, he's sort of someone who I'm following closely, and obviously Luke Littler is someone who keeping an eye on. But he's quite a quiet lad, not much of a character. I mean, what I love about this podcast is you really get into the characters and the the scandals and the funny moments. So Luke's being very careful, I think, at the minute. I mean, the thing that he's
There's time.
There's a lot of time.
he's like the big thing about him is he loves kebabs. That's like the thing.
And PlayStation, yeah.
And PlayStation.
We're gonna talk a bit more about Luke at the end because he hasn't got any personal scandals, but he sort of crossed paths with a couple of larger than life characters. We'll get into.
In more ways than one.
Should we go back to those nicotine stained glory years?
Yeah.
It was considered a game of chance until the start of the 20th century, and then it was mainly a pub game. The only major national tournament was the News of the World Championship, which began in the 1920s. Players would be introduced and the pub they hailed from would be announced with their name, sort of like your club. And it peaked in 1939. 280,000 people entered the News of the World Championships. So they had to do like qualifiers in leisure centres and pubs. But the final was eventually won by Marmaduke Brecon, who hailed from the Jolly Sailor pub in Hanworth. It's a great name.
That's
Yeah, you don't hear Marmaduke.
No.
My granddad's middle name was Marmaduke.
It's like the name of a cartoon lion.
Oh, is it? Is that what it actually?
No, it just sounds like that. That's what I
Yeah, I
imagine
see
the
that.
name Marmaduke is a cartoon
I'm just
lion.
picturing a jar of marmalade. I don't know where
Yeah.
it's from. I think it's Irish. Anyway, so in the 1970s, that was the only major tournament, the News of the World Championship, and none of this was on TV. But up in Yorkshire, Granada Television and ITV brought a show called Indoor League to the public. So the premise of Indoor League was basically like pub games, competitions. It was like skittles, arm wrestling was one of them.
Perfect.
And darts. And very quickly, darts became like the most popular part of the show. And ITV saw a bit of an opportunity. And so they decided to televise the News of the World Championship in the mid-70s. And this kicks off a boom in the sport. Soon there are more tournaments launching. TV channels are picking up more of them. In 1974, the World Masters launches, which is still considered one of the hardest tournaments that was ever played. It's won by Cliff Inglis, who had actually been a star of Indoor League. They were only showing Indoor League in Yorkshire, and 2 million people were watching it. There were only 3 channels, but still, it's mad. Anyway, so Cliff, having won Indoor League, goes one better and wins the World Masters on TV in 1974. And Cliff, he's very representative of the time. So he was known for his party trick, which was throwing darts to knock cigarettes out of people's mouths.
Wow.
And everyone used to love that. And apparently after a few drinks one night, he decided to crank it up a notch. So this is from Sid Waddell, the legendary darts commentator's book. He said, Cliff asked one of the hostesses, a busty lass, to step up. She did, and at Cliff's suggestion, took off her bra. Cliff asked somebody to put a 1p coin on her left breast. We all gasped. Cliff lined up the arrow, let it rip, and ding! It clipped off the coin. To everyone's delight. That's the Masters champion there. After a few drinks.
To everyone's delight.
Yeah. Good, clean fun, I think.
Yeah,
that
I
is.
guess if you've got a skill like that, you may as well put it to use.
For me,
Yeah.
that's sort of the vibe of like, you know, like a pavilion theatre on the end of a pier in like a faded seaside resort. That's the sort of capers I expect.
Yeah, I think darts has become too clean.
Yeah, it's too woke.
It's too woke. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this was like a real pub. Like the pub and the events were very overlapped, right? Everyone's drinking and smoking on the Jockey. Even when they're not playing, they're just, all the players are together getting smashed every night. Sid Waddell, who I mentioned, that excerpt came from his book. So he was actually one of the producers of Indoor League, and he quickly becomes the main commentator. Ultimately becomes known as the voice of darts for his like quite lyrical commentary. So a couple of quotes from Sid Waddell. He said of one player, he looks about as happy as a penguin in a microwave. And during one one-sided game, he said, it's the nearest thing to public execution this side of Saudi Arabia. It's charming. But he's like an interesting guy. So Sid, he was a Geordie lad who then went to Cambridge and did history. And in 1973, he published a saucy novel called Bedroll Bella, which was too saucy for W.H. Smith, who banned it.
This is Sid Waddell?
Yeah, Sid Waddell.
I didn't know this.
The legendary commentator. So I've got a bit of the description from the blurb of the book. It said, Bedroll Bella is the story of a feisty, foul-mouthed, hard-drinking, right raver and proud Geordie lass who runs away from home in search of teenage kicks. It depicts a world of knockers, birds, and having it off in alleyways and pub car parks.
Oh my God, I need to read this book today.
Banned by W.H. Smith.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. He's really, really fantastic commentator. I'm really sad that he's dead. He's so good. I don't know whether I'm sure he had like a degree in maybe English or something, because he's just so good with like words.
Yeah, he's like lyrical.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's history from Cambridge.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah, like smart guy and just great writer of saucy fiction.
Great imagination.
I need to.
Brilliant novelist.
Well, that novel should be serialised now, of Lady Chatterley's Lover type thing.
So he obviously becomes the voice of darts, but he said in his early years he was very nervous, and he would often call the checkouts wrong. Darts is actually quite a hard sport to commentate on, especially, you know, now.
Especially when you're fantasising about the erotic novel.
Having it off with a Geordie right raver.
Fantasising about that guy whipping off his Smurf costume.
His mind was on other
himself
things.
in a picture of Marjorie.
Sid. It's getting very steamed up in the commentary box. So Sid's having real trouble calling the checkouts, and apparently people start writing in, complaining. And he's quite Marmite anyway, because these like sort of very lyrical descriptions, some people don't like them. It's a bit like Peter Drury, the football commentator. And Sid's worst day comes in 1979. So apparently he had a really bad day. He kept calling the scores wrong, the checkouts wrong, people complaining. He goes to the pub with a guy from ITV, and there's a random punter in there who starts giving him stick, being like, you need to get off the telly. So I can't be arsed with this. So he goes back to his hotel, and he gets back to the hotel, and Yorkshire police are there waiting for him. And they're like, do you mind if we have a word? And he's like, yep, sure. And it turns out that a lady has rung them saying that she is fairly sure Sid is the Yorkshire Ripper.
Oh.
The Yorkshire Ripper is at large at this point. And do you remember there were these voice tapes sent to the police, taunting the police, which were supposedly from the Ripper?
Yeah.
Turned out to be a hoaxer, actually. Wearside Jack, as he became known.
Yeah.
But he had this Wearside accent that sounds quite similar to Geordie, and Sid's got a Geordie accent, and this woman is convinced he must be the Ripper. He's hiding in plain sight. So these coppers go down, and they're like, can we interview you? And so he agrees. He brings a couple of like officials from the darts tour just to kind of like be his witness. And so they start asking him questions, and they're like, so whereabouts do you live? And Sid's like, well, I live in Pudsey in West Yorkshire. And the policemen sort of glance at each other like, lives in Yorkshire. And then they're like, where were you on the following nights? And they list a few of the nights of the Ripper's attacks. And Sid pulls out his diary. He sort of keeps good records because of his expense claims. And it turns out that he was in Leeds, Headingley and Bradford on the night of attacks that took place there. So apparently at this point, these two coppers are like leaning in. They think they've got their man. They think the voice of darts is the Yorkshire Ripper. And then finally they ask him about his car. And Sid's like, well, I can't drive. And the police are like, for fuck's sake. Because the Ripper drives.
Is that he's just ruled out.
Yeah, he's ruled
says
himself
that.
out, and apparently they at first they're like,
surely you'd like look properly into that. Like it's quite easy.
So
to
the
go,
two-
I just can't drive. So,
yeah.
well, I guess
They
it's
go,
not you then.
"Oh,
Oh, damn it.
no."
Hunt
Never mind,
continues.
you're free to go.
Apparently, the other officials backed him up. They were like, "Yeah, he famously doesn't drive," because in the 70s that's quite unusual. And so they let him off. They're absolutely gutted. Anyway, so Sid's like, "Fucking hell, day from hell," and I've got to commentate tonight. So he then goes to commentate. He's really stressed. He's like, "I've just been accused of being the Yorkshire Ripper. I've been getting all the scores wrong. I'm going to really just try and focus." And he said his face is like an inch from the screen, just really intently focusing on his commentary. And he just, without looking, reaches for his water glass. It's like this big pint glass, takes a swig from it, and he feels something in his mouth, and he's like, spits it out, and there's a goldfish in his glass. And as a prank, the floor manager from ITV has put 2 goldfish in Sid's water just to fuck with him. On his day from hell.
Just got out of a police interview.
I think everyone
Surely,
knows
like,
he's just been accused of being the Ripper.
Of all the days to prank him, just like fuck off, please.
Tough day at the office for poor Sid. Anyway, back on the Ocky, darts is getting bigger all the time. It's really the early 80s where it starts kicking off. BBC and ITV are both showing tournaments. They're in a bit of a like ratings battle, who can get the best darts tournament. Darts is so big that in 1977, Muhammad Ali plays against the world number 1, who is of course Welshman Alan Evans. And Muhammad Ali wins, which is not a great advert for the sport. But so Evans was only allowed to hit doubles and trebles.
Yeah, there was
Wasn't that
some. Yeah,
He was
there was
handicapped.
some.
He couldn't score on
Okay.
singles.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I still think you got to beat just like a random boxer. Like, is Muhammad Ali
Yeah.
playing a lot of?
Maybe he's too scared to beat him. Maybe let
Yeah.
him win.
Anyway, but it's a big moment for the sport that the great Muhammad Ali is playing. In 1978, 3 million people watch as ITV televised the first ever World Championship final. Huge moment. And by 1980, darts has its first major star.
it certainly does, and that man is Eric Bristow, aka the Crafty Cockney. So Eric wins 5 world championships between 1980 and 86. So he's the bona fide star of the sport. He had a pretty mad life that I just wanted to go into a little bit. So Eric grew up in post-war East London, and he was part of this gang called the Oxted Boys, and they were always getting in all sorts of scrapes. They were robbing people, beating people up, stealing cars, burgling houses. And as is often the case in this line of work, he has a few close shaves. So one night he's about 16, 17, and him and a group of his mates beat this guy up in the pub. Like, it's a pretty brutal assault. Like, they're smashing him with chairs, glasses. But as they're doing it, the guy is just shaking his head and saying, "You boys have picked on the wrong guy." And it turns out they have. So this guy is like a big time gangster. He's from a local crime family. And over the next few weeks, Eric's mates start getting picked off one by one. So one of them gets both of his legs broken in a hit and run. Another one just gets like beaten to a pulp on the streets. So all of them are just shitting themselves. Luckily for Eric, they never come for him.
Too crafty.
He's too crafty, yeah. Which is lucky because by this point he's getting pretty good at darts. He's also, in case you hadn't guessed, he's not big into school. There's one time he calls up the police and tells them that a bomb has been planted at his school because he wants to get out of his German exam.
That's absolutely class.
That's everyone's dream when you're a teenager, isn't it?
I tweeted about this recently, so I'm just going to go off topic, but talking about having a bomb in their school to get out of school. The best day of my life at school was the day, it was in the 90s, and someone rang the school and said that there was a bomb threat, so we all had to be decanted to the local pub. I was like 7 years old.
Is that when you got into darts?
Oh man, sort of got into alcoholism. Yeah. I was 7 years old in the pub. It was a pub my dad and my uncle used to take me in all the time. And we were all there in the day, and the smell of stale beer, the smell of the pub in the day. And I was just there thinking, this is fucking class. This is brilliant. And then
I need to become an alcoholic.
yeah. And then my mum had to come and like collect us. Like everyone's parents had to come and collect them, and then I just got taken home. Was just eating chocolate and watching telly for the rest of the day. Best day of my life.
Dream.
Absolute dream.
Yeah.
So I love what he's done there.
Yeah.
Big fan. Because I think of being taken in there, being allowed to play pool, go on the jukebox and have a Twix, you know,
Yeah.
or like a bag of crisps and a lime
Lemonade and
soda.
lime,
yeah.
yeah.
J2O.
with a candy cigarette, trying to chat, leaning up the bar. You all right, Squire? Oh, it's just, you know, feels
Ladies.
like thanking you, sir. All that stuff. Yeah, love it. Heaven.
So what is the crafty Cockney just doing it to dodge an exam?
That's class.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
he's
I
got
love
his
that.
German exam. He hasn't revised, and gets the entire school evacuated.
Good on it, man.
Beautiful
yeah,
stuff.
Yeah. So he's playing a lot of darts at this point. He ends up playing for this pub team, and it's a really rough pub, the sort of place where fights are kicking off all the time, including inside their own team. So there's this one guy in their team who they all think he's a bit of a knob. So they always go and play these matches against other pubs, and afterwards they'd always bring out a plate of sandwiches for the players. And apparently this guy would always just like stuff his face with the sandwiches. None of them have got to eat anything. So one time they decide to teach him a lesson and snap toothpicks in half and hide them in the sandwiches. So when this guy's like ravenous after the end of his game of darts, goes in, just bites into this sandwich, and a set of toothpicks just pierce his mouth. He ends up having to go to hospital because he's so badly hurt.
That's really like a thoughtful. Do you know what I mean? What are we going to put
It's
in?
quite
Cold-blooded.
sadistic, really.
Yeah. It's screws, you know, like
Yeah.
toothpicks. Wow.
I think that kind of violent justice was sort of the world that they were operating in, because there was
Yeah.
another story Eric tells about the pub where they played their like home matches. There was an old guy in there who was notorious for stealing people's drinks, and one time the pub landlord clocks onto this and decides to leave out what looks like a double shot of vodka in a glass, and turns out it's actually white spirit. So this guy, when no one's looking, he necks a glass of white spirit.
Would that not kill you?
Like we almost
Yeah.
died.
Blind or
Apparently he's
something.
just like in the toilet, just like vomiting,
Yeah.
shitting himself, just like, yeah.
Lesson learned.
You would think so.
Right. So there's quite a lot of like Old
Quite a lot of
Testament
mob
justice,
justice.
being
Yeah,
meted out.
yeah. So anyway, back to Eric. He starts to make a name for himself on the sort of local pub circuit, and eventually starts playing nationally. And at 18, he goes pro and gets called up to the England team. There's quite a few big names, big darts names in the England team at this point. So he's in there alongside Bobby George, aka the King of Bling. So we mentioned Bobby George in the intro. He's one of the big characters of the age. He's the first one to introduce walk-on music and wearing these sort of flamboyant outfits. So he really adds a bit of razzmatazz to darts.
What's the outfit? It's like
So there's this one clip of him coming down in a gold cape, carrying a candelabra with lit candles on it.
love it.
Which, you know, when you're used to just some tubby borderline alcoholics like waddling out, this makes quite a change. There's a good clip that I wanted to play of him celebrating a 180.
Chance of 11 dart finish. Vintage low. Wants them all. Gets them all. What a leg of darts from the legends. Hey.
John, you require 41.
So
That should take John off if anything does.
What's funny about that is he's playing John Lowe, who hated all that stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he really didn't like all of that
Showmanship.
showmanship. And his like name was Old Stoneface because when he's like one of the best darts players ever. He would just you'd never see him do a nipple waggling celebration like that. That's the last thing he'd be doing. Just never ever show
Yeah.
him. Whereas I don't know if you guys like did a 180 or you won the set, like would you go crazy? I would.
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
That's
a
a
very
chance. Yeah.
I'm a really ungracious winner.
Oh, really?
I love
lord it
winning.
over him.
I'm not a bad loser, but my God, am I an
Yeah.
awful winner. Yeah, jumping up and down.
That's how you want it to be.
Yeah.
The other way around's bad.
Maybe we could borrow that shirt for the British Podcast Awards.
When you...
Do the nipple waggle. Would have been good if one of us now just revealed.
It's ingenious though. Like he was like, I know what I want to do. I'll get that shirt made.
Yeah, a lot of thought's gone into that.
Yeah.
But but when I first started watching darts, I think I had tonsillitis or something when I was like 8 in January, and the BBC one was on from Lakeside, and Bobby George was like, he's like the main pundit by this point, and he just gets you so in love with it anyway.
Yeah.
Just such charisma.
Yeah, really.
So got a good story about him actually from his sort of later career. So he had a good career as a player and then became a commentator. In the 90s, he built a mansion in Essex called George Hall, which actually was built in the shape of a darts arrow. And a few years ago, one of our newsletter readers tried to book George Hall out for a private party, and just as the booking was about to go through, they had an email offering them an enticing upgrade. So for an extra £100, Bobby's wife, the lovely Marie, would serve the drinks topless.
When was this? Like recently?
I'm not sure if
I
it
don't
was.
know. We had the
old
letter
story
a few
or-
years ago, but it might have been in the noughties.
So also in that England side of the 70s and 80s was dart's most legendary boozer, Cliff Lazarenko. So they're all pretty big boozers, but Cliff was on another level. So Eric Bristow tells this story about travelling with him to the Canadian Open and foolishly deciding to try and keep up with Cliff's drinking. So they arrive at Gatwick to catch their flight, and they wet the whistle by having 4 or 5 pints in the airport bar. And when they get onto the plane, they get some good news. They've been upgraded. So him and Cliff go up to the front of the plane in the posh seats, and over the course of their flight, Cliff orders 12 bottles of champagne for them. By the time they're getting off the plane, Eric is pretty out of it. The stewardess tells him she's never seen anyone drink that much in her 40-year career as an air hostess. And he's coming through security. He's like, I actually think I'm going to pass out. But somehow they make it to the hotel, and Eric's like, okay, thank God, I can just get to bed now. And as they're in the lobby, Cliff's like, great, so I'll quick freshen up and then see you in the hotel bar in 20 minutes. So Eric's like, fuck, okay, I've got to do it. Like, he's the senior player, I want to impress him. So he gets back down to the bar, and they have, another couple of pints there before heading out on the town, and they spend the night at these rock bars. And when is quite on brand as well. And when all of that closes up, they end up at this late night bar, and they go in, and this bar has 18 different bottles of spirits lined up behind the bar. And Cliff takes one look at that and is like, right, we're having one of each. And we're not leaving until we've tried all of them. So they do. And Eric ends up with alcohol poisoning.
Fucking hell.
So he said he wakes up in the hotel the next day, has no idea how he got home, literally can't get out of bed for a day and a half.
When Cliff's just...
Cliff apparently knocked on the door at 8 in the morning. He's like, you coming down for breakfast?
Pint?
Yeah. There's another story. Bobby George and Cliff win this tournament one time, and as a prize, they get a case of 40 bottles of wine as a prize. And Cliff just carries it up to their hotel room, empties all 40 bottles into the bathtub, and just proceeds to just scoop it out and drink a lot.
Or just a mug, just sloshing around in it.
Horrible.
I bet he weed in that bath as well.
Yeah. Cliff actually had a run-in with Big Bill Verbenach, who listeners might remember from our snooker episode. He was the 20-stone Canadian who lived on a converted bus in Worksop and once drank 76 cans of lager during a match.
76.
Yeah.
76. Even I think that's a lot.
And isn't he the one who leant over the table to play a shot and his trousers
Yeah.
ripped open right over his arse?
My favourite story about him was that he he used to claim the cost of 6 pints a day back on his taxes because it was considered a work expense because he needed it to stop the tremors before he played snooker.
I think that's absolutely legit. I think that's fine.
So did the tax man. They let him do it, didn't they?
Yeah.
So back in the 80s, the World Championships were sponsored by Embassy cigarettes. So Eric Bristow describes that in his book. He says, every player got 200 fags for competing, and every and every time we went on stage, there were 2 packets of fags waiting for us on the table, one for each player. And Embassy would reward the tournament winner with 600 fags a month for a year.
600 a month
That's
for the
20
winner?
a day, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and Eric actually said that because he was always very good about calling the World Championships the Embassy, so they loved him. And for like 2 decades after his last World Championship win, they just continued sending him 600 a month. So Eric quickly establishes himself as the elite star of darts. Like I said, he won 5 World Championships between 80 and 86. And after that 5th win, Sid Waddell, the commentator, poetically exclaimed, "When Alexander of Macedonia was 33, he cried salt tears because there were no more worlds to conquer. Eric Bristow is only 27.
Yeah. No.
Cried salt tears.
Salt tears. That's the history degree.
Yeah.
Putting that to good
Yeah.
use.
It's great. I
Good
love
line.
that. I love that kind of commentary.
Was that what? Because Eric Bristow has won all the darts
He's
competitions.
won 5 and 7 years.
A sport that is only watched in
Oh, that
England
really-
and
Yeah.
Netherlands.
Really makes me long for Sid Waddell saying stuff
Yeah.
like that. It's
Yeah,
brilliant.
probably the only time a darts player has been compared to Alexander of Macedonia.
I'll be listening out for it this year.
Yeah. But from that glorious high, it was all about to come crashing down. So months after winning his 5th World Championship, Eric is playing at the Swedish Open when he is hit by a crippling bout of dartitis. So this is a real condition. It's a bit like the yips in
Yeah.
golf.
Yeah.
What's the yips?
So it's basically like a sort of muscle spasm.
But it's
like
a mental
nervous,
thing,
it's like
really.
a nervous twitch kind of thing, which happens at the like crucial moment. Either with golf, it's as you're hitting the ball. With darts, it's as you release the dart. So Eric's playing this match, and suddenly he just gets this twitch as he tries to throw the darts, and they're going all over the place. So he crashes out of that tournament, and it takes him quite a while to recover. He does eventually get back to playing high level darts, but he's kind of never the same player again. He never wins another World Championship. So it's actually quite like a sad moment for him, just really sudden. But back to the good stuff. So for a decade at his peak, he was dating another darts player, Maureen Flowers. So she was the women's world number 1 during the 80s. So they were a bit of a darts power couple. And the reason I mentioned her is that when Eric introduces her in his book, he has a quite charming description of her. So he says, most female darts players around this era looked like butch lesbians. They were big girls who you wouldn't want to fight, never mind have sex with, and they all had tattoos. Maureen was different.
I'm sure Maureen appreciates
Yeah.
that. Eric's big rival in the early 80s was Jockey Wilson, who, darts players are not known for their health. I always think of Andy Fordham. He was 31 stone and he drank 24 beers before taking to the Jockey and then won the world title. But even by those standards, no one was quite as unhealthy as Jockey Wilson. So Jockey was this like hard boozing Scotsman. He brought his own vodka to every match. He was nicknamed Gumsy because he refused to brush his teeth. And he said he never brushed his teeth because my gran told me the English poison the water. And you probably won't be surprised to hear that he lost his last tooth by the age of 28. They just all fell out.
What was he drinking if he was...
A lot of Iron Brew and Fanta.
Okay,
apparently.
just because you can't touch water. It's
Yeah,
too
just
risky.
soft drinks. Yeah, Coke. A lot of vodka as well. But his tipple was just vodka and Coke, but just like heavy on the vodka. So a lot of booze, a lot of soft drinks. I mean, he was a fairly unhealthy character in many ways. So one player said, Jockey had a habit of sucking the coating off dry roasted peanuts and handing them round as if they were ordinary salted ones.
Oh, that's horrible.
Fucking horrible.
That is absolutely vile.
But Jockey's obviously a big boozer as well, a real heavyweight. People said he'd win darts matches when other players would have been in intensive care. So he's sort of up there with Cliff Lazarenko on that front. Anyway, the same year that he lost his last tooth, he took up darts. And very quickly he came to fame. So his route to the sport was actually winning Bullseye, the darts-themed game show.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a, post-indoor league again. It's this sort of like, it's part quiz show, it's part darts competition, and Jockey wins it. Apparently it had 20 million viewers at its peak, Bullseye.
Yeah.
Now, the only thing that would get 20 million viewers now would be like England in a Euros final sort of thing, I think. So
I think I looked that up the other day. It was 19.
So
19 was the
more
the
people
Euros.
watch
More
Jockey
people
Wilson
watch
win
Bullseye in the
Bullseye.
80s.
Well, I do think it's the superior sport.
yeah, I mean,
so.
arguably it's the bigger event. But then Jockey really hits the big time in 1982 when he wins the World Championship. And he's like an overnight sensation because he's obviously an amazing darts player, but he's also like humble and funny. And I mean, we've alluded to it a lot. A lot of the appeal of darts is like they're just normal people. They're not just like super elite athletes.
Definitely, and I think that's why it's become more popular with Luke Littler getting so far last year, because he's a 16-year-old lad who isn't, what you think peak physical physique is, but he's just like taken it by storm, and that's why I think so many people have got into darts next. I think they watched him and went, "I can do that.
Yeah.
It's fucking easy."
He's also like not media trained though, right? Or maybe he is, but
No.
he's just quite natural when he talks.
I guess
Yeah.
because he burst onto the scene so quickly and so kind of unexpectedly.
Do they
That-
give those guys media training now? I don't know.
No idea.
I don't know.
They shouldn't, because the charm of it is that they're real.
Exactly. I don't know. I don't think they do.
So Jockey was like instantly just a huge hit. So ITV, who are televising a lot of these tournaments, they're like, right, this Jockey guy, he's our future star. Let's give him a bit of glamour. And they decide to splash out $2,000 to buy him a set of dentures. Just got to sort out the teeth thing because he has no teeth. Unfortunately for them, Jockey does not look after them. So a friend says that he goes around to Jockey's house, and you know how you have to like put your dentures in a glass of water to clean them. Jockey's just got them there in a glass of Fanta.
Wonderful.
Just cleaning them in the Fanta. And he doesn't really take to the dentures. So he says when he drinks, they make him retch. I'm not sure why. He's just maybe not.
Possibly because they've been soaked in Fanta for 8 hours.
I think he's just not used to feeling any teeth in there. It's just like his mouth feels crowded. So they end up just being a sort of party trick where he'll occasionally just brandish them, like when he hits a 180. We got this clip of him on a chat show being asked about it.
Thanks to the TV Times for supplying them for me. Thank you very much, David.
Are you better with them in or out?
Well,
No.
You can sort of hear the noise of the dentures leaving his mouth. Yes.
And that was before media training. They're just
Yeah.
popping them out on Wogan.
I love it. And so he's this megastar. He actually has a pretty eventful year because when the Falklands War breaks out in 1982, it's a big deal for Jockey because he is married to a girl who, she's Scottish, but she was born in Argentina, and her parents named her Malvina, which is, the islands in Argentina are called Islas Malvinas. So she's named after the Falkland Islands, and apparently, despite being Scottish and holding a British passport, she worries that she's going to be deported when the war breaks out. She probably didn't need to worry about it. But this actually makes her and Jockey a bit of a magnet for criticism from a certain type of jingoistic Englishman. And during one tournament, an official gets quite drunk and starts making disparaging comments to Jockey, being like, "Hey, you fucking RG wife." And Jockey just turns around and decks this bloke in front of the crowd, and he's banned for several tournaments. So it's an eventful year for him, and he probably could have properly spun off, but he is kept on the straight and narrow by Bobby George. So Bobby's his sort of mentor and sugar daddy. As I said, like unlike a lot of the other players, Bobby's quite like with it. He doesn't go too wild with the booze, and he sort of like makes sure Jockey turns up on time, make sure he doesn't get too pissed. And yeah, he's sort of a father figure in some ways.
I've actually got a story that slightly contradicts that.
Does it involve a topless lovely Marie?
I hope so.
Not yet. Not
Potential
yet.
upgrade.
No, this is early. I think this is more sort of. So this is like late 70s, early 80s when darts it's actually becoming like a big deal globally. So the top stars have this jet set lifestyle where they're playing tournaments in the US, Canada, like around Europe, in the Middle East. And it's 1979, and Bobby and Jockey, in fact, fly over to the US for a tournament. And on the flight, Jockey decides to get a round of miniature vodkas in, and then another one. And over the course of the flight, him and Bobby are like trading rounds until at some point Jockey just turns out his pockets. So it's like I've got nothing left. And Bobby's like, well, you've got your checkbook, surely. And he's like, yeah, about that. And it turns out that he has gone on a 3-week trip to America with £15 in cash and no checkbook.
And he spent it all
and he's
on vodka
now
minis.
spent it all on vodka minis.
On the flight there.
Yeah, haven't even got off the plane yet. So when they get there, he's like, okay, I've got to find some way to make money. And they go and do this exhibition match for cash. And after that finishes, they got a bit of cash in their pocket and they're supposed to be heading straight off to this tournament in Las Vegas. But Jockey is still broke. So he decides that he's just going to stay where they are and just hustle people in pubs basically for a bit more cash. So Bobby's like, okay, look, you do that, but you've got to get to the tournament. Like I'll go on ahead. And Jockey eventually turns up in Vegas 2 days later, having hitchhiked through the Nevada desert, like around Death Valley. Like apparently he turns up at this tournament just like completely sunburned, covered in dust. He's been dodging rattlesnakes in the desert.
That's probably the last place on earth you want to hitchhike. No? It's the hottest place on earth.
Yeah.
Some clammy Scotsman. Poor bloke.
Actually, Eric Bristow says that these tournaments, they sound pretty mad. So he says that there were like 40 or 50 married American women who would just be traveling around the tournaments for a 3-week period, just shagging all the darts players, basically. They're like groupies.
They're married groupies.
Married groupies, yeah. So one time, Bobby George disappears midway through a tournament and he's supposed to be playing a match. And they're like, where the hell is he? And he comes in soaking wet with this woman who's also completely soaking, and it turns out that they'd snuck off and were shagging on the lawn of the hotel when the sprinklers came on and completely soaked them. And they go in there and the two of them walk in completely soaked, and the woman's husband is just in there.
Oh, because when you said married women, I thought the husband wouldn't be there.
Is he maybe into it? Is it like...
Oh, okay.
I don't know if
These
he's
guys who want Dennis Rodman to shag their wife.
Yeah.
Some guys want Bobby George to shag darts cucks.
I don't know. Yeah. Eric says as well that like sometimes he'll like hook up with a woman and realize afterwards that he was like playing darts against her husband the day before.
Right. Is it only in America that there's this group?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wonder if it still exists.
Yeah.
Weird. I don't know. For some reason, these English dart stars are just like
The accent.
absolute heartthrobs. Yeah, it's the accent.
Must be.
It's his ability to drink 25 pints. It's just such a turn on. Eric says that while they're in the States, they all hang out at these English pubs in Santa Monica. So they find these spots that serve like roast dinners and fish and chips.
Only Fools and Horses memorabilia.
Yeah.
Well, it's popular. It's a global sensation.
It sure is. Just love the idea of them. Just like as soon as they touch down, it's like, right, where's the English pub?
Yeah, not in that foreign muck.
Yeah.
So they'd also play around Europe quite a lot, and there's this story of them being in Copenhagen, and their hotel is in the middle of the red light district, and all of the darts lads are loving it, but some of the female players are a bit put off by this. And Eric says that one time the female player who's about 60 sidles up to him and is like, Eric, do you mind? Would you be able to show me around some of these sex shops? I just don't really know what it is. So he's like, okay, like, I'll take you around, Sandra. And he's like walking around this sex shop, just having to like explain what a dildo is. And like, what?
Does it require explanation?
Apparently so. Yeah.
You can have one guess at what that's for. Maybe there's some more exotic shit.
Yeah. What's a pneumatic pegging drill?
I don't think pegging existed then. It's a relatively new thing.
It's an internet thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Like pulled pork. Yeah, it's a new thing. Everyone's talking
Pulled
about
pork
it.
and pegging.
Yeah. And
I love
vapes,
the
Uber.
Sort of the zeitgeist.
Love that it'd be like, can you show me around a sex shop? Just sort of talk me through it.
Yeah.
There's another story of Big Cliff Lazarenko being in New Zealand, and he claims that he was cursed by a white witch while he was there. So So this white witch had apparently been sprinkling leaves on him from a pouch.
Also.
And then a couple of days later, the plane that him and Eric Bristow were travelling on caught fire, one of the engines.
Well,
So-
how else do you explain
How
that?
else? Yeah.
There's only one explanation.
There's only one
for that.
expression.
And how
White
much
witch.
was he drinking at that point when he said that?
I mean,
He felt the leaves falling on
yeah,
him.
judging by his previous form.
You were in the gutter, Cliff. We found you there. Rolling in some leaves. So darts hits, the first golden era hits its peak in 1984 when there are 23 televised tournaments. So every other week there's something on BBC and ITV. But then ITV start dropping some of them. So apparently like the viewing figures were as good as ever, but Greg Dyke takes over at ITV and he decides he wants to attract these sort of like yuppies with this more like modern selection of sports, and he thinks that darts belongs to a different era. So ITV start to drop some tournaments, and then in 1988 the BBC drop everything except the World Championship. A couple of months later ITV decide to cut all their darts coverage. One player describes it as the darts equivalent of the Wall Street crash. Which I guess it kind of is. But
Yeah.
didn't start any world wars this time. So darts is suddenly in disarray. All these great players, your pay packet, you're losing a shitload of money over that. And in response, the guys running the sport decide we need to modernise. This is when they banned smoking and drinking on the hockey.
Boo.
Early 90s.
Worst thing to happen to darts ever.
Really, I mean, like, I get that the smoking's not going to come back, but pints coming back would be perfectly fine, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I suppose they just don't want it to mess up the form. But we were saying, it can enhance.
Yeah. Anyway, it does nothing, the booze ban and the smoking ban. They think that might, like, ITV might take them back, but it just doesn't work. So in this era, in the early 90s, the only darts on TV is just the World Championships in January. And for some of the big names, we are getting towards the end of their careers too. So Jockey Wilson starts to go off the rails a bit. In 1991, he jumps into the crowd to try and fight someone who's heckling him, and he accidentally punches a granny. And then actually Jockey, it's quite a sad finish. So in 1995, the doctors, they diagnose him with a form of diabetes and they tell him, you can't drink again, you'll kill yourself. And he goes on playing for some exhibition matches for a bit because he's got a tax bill. But that's basically it for his career. He's like, I'm shy without the drink, I'm not going to bother. So he just packs it in, moves back to Scotland and basically becomes a recluse. No one hears from him again. It's pretty sad. Meanwhile, the sport is dragged into a civil war. So in 1994, it splits into two groups. I'm not going to get too much into the governance of darts, but BDO and PDC. So one stays with BBC on terrestrial TV. Sky take over with the other, which is where a lot of the top players go because they basically get more money, more control of their lives. But this is really the doldrums. And I guess for me, rock bottom is 1995 when Welsh bullseye contestant John Cooper turns out to be a serial killer.
I didn't know that.
I've sort of crowbarred this into the story. It's not really part of the narrative.
Okay.
But I think as a symbolism of where darts is at, it's quite...
Was he?
Yeah.
He wasn't a pro darts player
No,
as
it's just
well.
a guy who was on bullseye. But from those ashes, a new golden era was beginning. And no one came to symbolise it more than Phil the Power Taylor. So Phil Taylor had been around since the 80s. He'd been sort of mucking around with darts. He'd seen it on TV and like a lot of players had just thought, I could do that. So he starts taking it up, but he can't afford to quit his job until he becomes friendly with Eric Bristow, the crafty Cockney. And Eric becomes his sponsor, really. So he loans Phil 10 grand and says, quit your job. You need to do this full time. Just pay me back when you win something. Don't worry about it. It's all it's pretty generous of Bristow. And Phil takes this really seriously. So by the mid-80s, he's taking darts so seriously that he leaves his wedding after the service to go and play in a county match.
Wow. You must have a very understanding wife to do that.
Apparently he comes back later, rejoins the reception. Late on, I guess. He missed the meal, I'm guessing. The hog roast.
Yeah, she must have really believed in him to do that.
Yeah.
I do think weddings were a bit lower key back then. My mate's dad said that he watched. I was like, "What did you do on your wedding night?" I said, "I watched Match of the Day." Back home, it just wasn't as big a deal. But yeah, maybe a county darts match is out of the question. Anyway, Phil starts getting pretty good, but his relationship with Bristow starts to change when he starts winning stuff. Eric kind of, having been really generous, he kind of uses his generosity as an excuse to sort of lord it over Phil Taylor a bit. And when Phil wins his first big title in 1988, the Canadian Open, apparently Eric Bristow is waiting at the bottom of the stage. Phil's got one of those like giant novelty checks for $5,000, and Eric's just waiting at the stage and just goes, "I'll have that, thank you very much." And he keeps doing it. So apparently, like, Taylor would ring him from tournaments. Eric's not playing as much by the early 90s because of the dartitis. And Taylor would ring him from tournaments being like, "Yeah, I got knocked out in the quarters, but I played well." And he'd just be like, "Call me back when you fucking won something." Just being quite mean. One time, apparently, Phil Taylor made a rare appearance in the bar to buy a Coke before a county match. And Eric, who's like playing a card game, getting pissed, just looks up and is like, "What are you doing in here? You owe me money. Get practicing."
Oh my
So he is
God.
being a bit of a dick about it.
Yeah.
And they start to fall out just around the time that Taylor starts to get really, really good. And in 1989, they get drawn against each other in the World Championship. It's on TV. And Phil Taylor, he says later that I was purely motivated by the way that he'd humiliated me over this money. And he proceeds to beat him 6-1. He absolutely smashes him. So they've really fallen out. And this is just as darts is hitting its rock bottom in the mid-90s with the old serial killer. And just around this point is when Phil Taylor really starts to take off. He starts winning world championships. He defects to Sky TV. He becomes the greatest player ever, really. He wins 16 world titles. And he is really credited with kicking off the new golden age by driving all this new interest in the sport. In 1997, Eric Bristow has a brief comeback and Phil dispatches him in the semi-finals. And then Phil, he's like the face of darts. In 2010, he's the runner-up for Sports Personality of the Year. Sid Waddell called Taylor the greatest to ever draw breath. Although not everyone was a fan, so he had a big rivalry with Michael van Gerwen, the Dutch guy, who sort of burst onto the scene quite young. And their rivalry even led to a backstage scrap, because Phil Taylor's best mates with Ricky Hatton, the boxer, and apparently would always go on about it, just like constantly be like, "Did I mention that Ricky Hatton's my best mate?" And apparently he had this habit of backstage, he would like shadow box people, like as they were like coming off the oche, just like, you know what I mean, your head's spinning, you don't want to talk to anyone. Phil Taylor pops up in your grill, just like shadow boxing you, pretending to be Ricky Hatton. And one day he did it to Michael van Gerwen, who just threw him to the floor.
Yeah, because Michael van Gerwen's an absolute beast. He's
Is he
huge.
quite big? Like that?
Yeah.
Anyway, these days Phil Taylor he's a retired statesman figure, isn't he? His mantle as the face of darts has been taken up by Luke Littler, who Phil's a big fan of Luke Littler, possibly too big a fan. So we talked about this in a recent pod that Phil the Power Taylor was asked in an interview, like, would you have a chat with Luke Littler, just like dispense some wisdom about your 15 world titles? And he said, "Yeah, I could, but I would have to move in with him for a few days." And they were like, "Why? Why do you need to suddenly be in his bedroom?" And he said, "I want to see how he practices, see how he eats, see how he exercises, see how he does anything." He said, "If he's playing on them PlayStations, I would give him a set time of an hour."
This has got the makings of a good sort of TV show where he moves in
little
with him.
sitcom,
Yeah, or like, those things where like two comedians go on holiday.
Yeah.
Or like wife swap.
fishing. Yeah.
So I used to go and move into their house. So yeah, his dad, Luke Littler's dad, moves in with, I don't know, Phil the Taylor's wife, and then he moves
It's
in
got to
with
be
him.
Luke's dad.
Yeah.
Littler, though, actually, his hero was not Phil Taylor growing up. It was Raymond van Barneveld,
Oh yeah,
who
Barney.
was sort of Taylor's rival for a bit. They played for like the different darts federations for a bit, and then Barney came later and sort of was kind of second fiddle. But apparently Barney heard about this, that Luke Littler was like worshipped him as a kid, and he was like, "Oh, I'll send him a text." He got hold of his number from a commentator, dropped Luke a text, and Littler just didn't reply.
Oh no.
And then
that's really
Raymond then gave an interview, like seething about it. He said, "If I've been your inspiration for years, I expect a text message back. The dude's on his phone all day. Fuck off." Love it.
Oh, that makes me really sad. Barney seems really nice. Oh.
Barney got called a love rat by the Sun for like,
Love it.
he basically got a new girlfriend while I think he was already getting divorced. I don't think it was love rat tier, but the one detail that I did quite like is that he chatted up a fan who sold her stories to the tabloids, and his way of like sort of chatting her up, he sent her a picture of himself in a hotel bed, and he'd written her name on a pad of paper next to him. I just love that as a romantic gesture.
Do you think that's the equivalent of like showing today's newspaper as like a hostage?
It's like, I don't send this picture to everyone.
This isn't to everyone.
Yeah, you're special. Yeah, you're right. That's what it means.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That's why. It feels like a Ryman advert or something.
Yes, show them you care. Like Premier in notepaper.
Yeah, scrap paper.
Louise. Yeah.
Anyway, Littler has once again spiked interest further. We're definitely in another golden age after the doldrums of the 90s. 4 million people watched Luke Littler's first World Championship. For Sky, that is a lot, I
that's
think.
loads.
That's about as many as you're going to get.
Yeah.
But as darts enjoys this second golden age, the fame can get a little overwhelming for some players. Just ask Wayne Mardle, I think he's a former player now, isn't he? Is he still playing?
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah.
In his book, he describes playing at this exhibition tournament in the Netherlands, just like a payday, and he meets this fan. He says the fan is a tanned, beefed up Adonis of a human being who'd turn any head, female, male, gay, straight, simply by walking into a room. Turned out, according to my new Dutch friends, this chap was a famous male porn star who also loved darts. Later on, he'd had a few drinks. We'd been entertaining the crowd, and to be fair, I wasn't exactly sober. Inevitably, his penis came up, so to speak. Eventually, he went, "You should sign my penis." I laughed, of course, quipped that I'd just grab a pen, and jokingly made as if to reach around to my jacket to grab a Sharpie. By the time I turned back, this gentleman had unfurled, and there really is no other way of describing the ceremony of that moment, an appendage of truly gargantuan proportions. "Wayne," he said solemnly, "sign my penis." Andy Fordham was sitting across from us. We exchanged a glance and simply shrugged as if to say, "When in Holland." And then he says, "I put my signature on there. In fact, there was so much room, Andy ended up putting his own name down as well. Our full names with room to spare." It's a nice moment.
That's great.
Classic stories.
Yeah, so it can be glamorous at an exhibition event. But for the old guard, who sort of, in their heyday, the likes of, Jockey and Bristow, they're used to a couple of TV channels, tabloid reporter with beer on his breath. They can find the new media landscape like a bit disorienting. And in 2016, do you remember there was that scandal broke about these paedophile football coaches? Eric Bristow waded into the situation on Twitter. He wrote, "Might be a loony, but if some football coach was touching me when I was a kid, as I got older, I would have went back and sorted that puff out." And then 2 hours and 30 minutes later, he tweeted, "Sorry, meant pedo, not puff."
That's one of the all-time great tweets.
2 hours.
2 hours, yeah. Like, what's happened in those 2 hours?
Did someone wake him up?
But yeah, he went to Alton Towers, put his phone in a locker. All right. Came back. He's like, "What's going on here?"
Bad
I like
timing.
that he thought that was going to be that was like the scandal of it, was that he'd said perforate. To be fair, that is the sort of mob justice that would be dished out in his pub.
Yeah, I believe
Absolutely.
it.
Believe it.
Yeah. I wouldn't. Yeah, exactly. He would have gone back and sorted him out. I'm sure he would
I would
have.
have
Put some
cocktail
toothpicks
sticks.
and white spirit.
Yeah, 100%.
So that is the story of the two golden eras of darts. But from these like two golden eras, like of the people we've talked about, do you have a favourite?
From the golden eras, I mean, I love it all. Bobby George is like really a big one for me. Cuddly and funny and charming, and yeah, really sort of when you think about darts, who do you think of? And I think about him.
His
the most.
arm with like
His
the gold,
arm, with all the rings and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about you guys? Who's your favourite?
I'm quite a fan of Sid Waddell, the commentator.
Yeah, 100%.
He's just an interesting character.
His book's really good. Beers, Bellies and Bullseyes. It's cool.
That's the one you
I
read.
thought you meant the other one, yeah. One was a right raver.
Don't know if you've heard of Bedroll Bella. It's Bedroll because she carries a mattress around with her. I don't think it's actually that steamy, but yeah, the blurb's telling. It's the way he also, I read it out so you couldn't see, but the words knockers and having it off are in inverted commas. Like,
Oh, I love that.
yeah, I like Sid. I'm pretty partial to Jockey. I just think sweet man.
Yeah.
who brought excitement to the hockey. If I could sort of be mates with one of them, or if one of them was going to be my dad or friend, it'd be Bobby for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Or if I was rolling around on a lawn with the sprinklers on, like something out of Desperate Housewives.
And I love the upgrade of topless
Yeah.
drinks served by the lovely Marie.
At a mere £100, a snip.
Snip, yeah. Absolute touch of class.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's all we've got time for. Ruth, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thanks, Zach.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.